Everyone, good evening. How are you doing? Christian Burne here, rapid transformational therapist and resilience coach, and welcome this evening to the third edition of Agents of Calm, which is a live interview series which aims to capture the stories, the ideas and wisdom of wonderful people who are doing their bit to help bring clarity, balance and raise consciousness to the world. In their own unique way, either through their business or through their own personal worldview. This evening, I am joined by the lovely Reva Ananda, who, as well as being a professional copywriter and creative, is also the co-founder of the Unconscious podcast, on which I was very grateful to be a guest a few weeks ago when it first launched. Reva and I will be getting into this emerging narrative and focus of interest for many people around what does new normal look like as we begin to emerge into a post-pandemic world. So without further ado, good evening, Reva, and thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I know it's, Reva, by the way, is in Dubai. So I guess it must be 10 o'clock over there now?
Yeah, just a minute past 10, and I was just getting into my lockdown quarantinis. The second one down. No, I'm kidding.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join this evening.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So let's get straight into it, really. I mean, I think your Unconscious project and Agents of Calm, I think, share a lot of values in terms of what we're trying to do, particularly around this idea of raising consciousness in people. And I think that's a good place to start as this whole idea and debate starts to bubble up around what new normal is. How are you finding it for yourself and through your work? I mean, what are you understanding about people's different views and approaches to what normal is going to be like going forward?
I think the word new normal explains a lot, but at the same way, it's very contradictory as well, because nothing is normal about this situation. This is something, this is a massive change that's happening in a very, very narrow time scale, which the world has never seen before. And collectively, everyone is going through the same thing. It's not even like how different is it for you, for us? It's everyone is facing the same panic. Everyone is going through the same mentality, the mind shift. So there's a huge shift in terms of how we work, how we behave, and how we emote in a very, very short period of time. But for me personally, I think the new normal is all about not more than adjusting ourselves. It's about not wanting to be left behind. So there's no more question about being left behind or being slow in the way we do things. It's about more of taking initiative and bringing the future towards us. It's not about waiting for something to happen, because something has already happened. And now how are we going to make the situation really better for ourselves? So I think that has created a lot of awareness and mind shift amongst many of us, which would be the silver lining in all of this.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I think, from my side, I mean, I think we'll find that outside of us, in terms of the external systems and structures that we've become so used to living within, that in many ways numbed us from it to a large part on finding our sort of true potential as individuals. In the absence of those things over the last couple of months, I think we've realized that actually they're not necessary. And I love this idea of personal sovereignty that we were talking about before the call. I think a lot of people have started to rediscover and become realigned with their kind of own personal sovereignty, and that they don't necessarily need to be defined by all of those things were external to them to be happy, to thrive, and to thrive in the right way. I mean, again, we're talking about perhaps, financially, and from a financial point of view, it's been quite challenging, but, we thrive in many different ways. So, I mean, have you found, so in terms of your own sense of values and what you deem now important, the meaning that you're giving to things in the world, have they adjusted at all over the last couple of months?
I think when we talk about, let's talk about the sovereignty part of it, because that is something that I really wanted to talk about today as well.
Okay.
When it comes to personal sovereignty, about freedom, the way I look at freedom is two aspects. So one is the material freedom that we are so used to. It's about being financially free. It's about being free in a sense of being able to do what I want to do, take decisions, making things work for myself. But there's the other sort of freedom that people have been concentrating a lot the past few months, because if you can't go external, if you can't go outside, then naturally you go inward, inside.
Yeah.
So that's the material freedom part that's happening, but there's also the internal freedom part that's happening. So far, when you look at financial or material freedom, it's always about, working hard. It's about the grit, the being persistent. It's about trying hard. It's about pulling late nights. But I think that has shifted a little bit. If people have started to become a little bit more conscious about the way they work, about aware about how they separate, or there's no more separation in terms of work and personal life. So I think there's a lot of passion that has started to form. People have started to do things that they love. They found curiosity for a lot of things that has brought about a lot of creativity, a lot of learning, and so much newness amongst us. So that I think that is the ideal definition of freedom. It's not so much about the material freedom, but being free to create a life that you want, or for others around you. So that's a very, very key change that I personally see.
No, I agree. And I think for me, it's, I'm focusing a lot of my work on the moment in helping people understand what their personal sovereignty is about. And making sure that they have the tools to protect, not just to protect that sovereignty, to build and strengthen it as they go back into the world. And I've sort of labeled that now proactive resilience, which is something that I find really interesting. But typically resilience is our ability to bounce back from adversity. But if we look at resilience as steadying the foundations, proactive resilience is what really builds the dream house on top of it. And so I'm doing a lot of work and thinking around that at the moment. And for me, it boils down into four main pillars. One is commitment. If we're lit up and deeply passionate and deeply aligned with what we're doing, then it's very difficult for anything out here to shift us. It's about control. So how we control our emotions, how we would control our thoughts. You talked about conditions response, which is so earlier about when we're talking about subject limiting beliefs, which we can come on to in a bit, but how we, start to control our conditioned responses in a way that works for us. The third one is about confidence. Now, I think if we raise our commitment and we raise our control, confidence will naturally emerge from that. But there's also other ways that we can start to build our confidence. And final one is an awareness and appreciation of competence, which I think is really interesting, because we beat ourselves up a lot over things where really, if you look at it, we're very unfair on ourselves, because it's usually situations over which we've either had very little experience or we've sort of got into with very little know-how. Things have gone wrong. So having an appreciation and a humility, I guess it boils down to humility, using humility as a resource for growth, being aware of what I don't know, being okay with that and learning it, and making that a central part of who we are as we move towards what we're doing. So in terms of the unconscious project and how is that mapping to helping people move out from this period? What kind of work are you doing around there?
I think unconscious was this, although it might seem like it, Unconscious podcast didn't start because of this pandemic. Unconscious was something that, a lot of people thought that we took this chance to actually launch our podcast, which is amazing because we started getting a lot of response. So that's great. But we started this project, in December last year. And it was all about our personal, bringing our the WhatsApp conversations that Chris McLean and myself would have every single morning about, hey, I read about this yesterday. I watched this yesterday. By the way, you should watch this YouTube show. And we discuss this every single day. And then one fine day, and it's been happening for years. 2-3 years, Chris and myself were colleagues, right?
Yeah.
So one fine day we were like, hey, you know what? Actually, I think we sound a bit interesting. This could actually interest a lot of our friends as well, and maybe people we know. Why don't we get people to jump in on the conversation? And that's how Unconscious Podcast started. It's really about creating if you could just by a little 2 millimeters be better than what you were yesterday, then that is already growth, and growth is never linear, right? Growth is exponential. So you should always look at growth in a way that how much better was I from yesterday? How much better am I from a year ago? So that's how Unconscious Podcast started. A big part of what we do is actually being very self-aware, as what the show title is. It's being conscious about a lot of things. And during this pandemic, which I see it as a social experiment, right? It's actually rethinking how we have been operating all these years, and whether it has been necessary, like you mentioned, the hours that we've been working, the amount of effort that we've been putting, the amount of drive time that we do each day. Is it totally necessary? And is it the right way? Is this the right way of operating? Because without all this, we're really thriving today as well. Maybe not financially, but definitely in terms of creatively, definitely in terms of self-awareness. So this, I think, it's a big part about what we're trying to do with Unconscious on a day-to-day basis. Again, bringing back to the new normal, right? We look at it as being the new normal, or the current situation has brought us into a plane which is accessible to everybody. That's very, very inclusive. So that has somehow, started breaking down the separation that we have faced all this time. Yes, we are kind of like isolated. Yes, there is separation in terms of everyone is under lockdown, but then whether you're rich or poor, or you're east or west, or whether you're black or white, young or old, everybody's affected by the same issue. So in a sense that it has made us realize how some of the most basic things are actually the most necessary things when it comes to our life. So that's what we do conscious.
I think you're right. And I think that brings us back to that point about how I think we've naturally been realigned with some very important values that I think may have got dampened down or sort of drowned out a little bit about, whilst we've been in the grind that we've been for decades and decades and decades, we've just been going through this system, and those things have got drowned out a little bit. But, when we talk about those traditional values, things like, family, safety, but very, very basic. We want to go into sort of
the basics,
Maslow or anything like that, but it really is going back down to the hierarchy of needs. And from that, I think there has been, and I think you touched on it briefly, and this is kind of my slightly sort of romantic side, and the thing that I believe in. I think there's been a gentle emergence and acceptance of this thing around spiritual intelligence, which has started to come out. Now, obviously, spirituality is central to both our work, de facto. But I think it's still something that is quite divisive, although less so. But if you look at some of the things that you've just talked about, self-awareness, humility, independence, ability to sort of look in for our inner strengths, that's all the principles of spiritual intelligence. And what interests me is whether or not that's going to start becoming more of a movement for more people than it is at the moment, because it's still very much on the fringes, amazingly, given if you look at the statistics around the growth in things like yoga and meditation and qigong and all these other things that were considered alternative a decade ago that are now very much mainstream. You could argue that there is already a strong spiritual movement, but I just think it's the terminology and the way it's labeled is still awkward for a lot of people.
Yeah, maybe the word spirituality. I had this discussion with a friend of mine a week ago. I think the term spirituality frightens a lot of people because they instantly associate it with religion, and then it becomes a little bit woo-woo and magical and angels and something that's out there, something that's not tangible.
It's kind of mystical or dogmatic. Yeah, one or the
exactly.
other. Exactly. Yeah.
So that's what. But at the same time, right? I think I won't be wrong to say our amygdalas are like in super high alert mode these days, right? There's an impulse to stay on top of everything, whether it's the news. We are continuously scrolling through things. We are downloading all sorts of apps and graphs and facts and figures to find out how many deaths are there, how many recoveries are there, what are the numbers. This is the first thing people do every morning, just looking at these numbers. WhatsApp groups and so much of binge watching, whether it's about conspiracy videos or Netflix. There's so much of information overload. And what I can say is we're kind of like tangled in a web of algorithms. And what happens when you're like really tangled up is people really naturally want to take a break from all of it. And then you start asking questions like, what is this all about? Like, and I think when you talk about spirituality, four things really stand out for me, right? It's about, when it comes to information, number one, it's about being aware of what you are, being aware of what's going on around our world. But at the same time, how are you perceiving this information, and how much of it are you trusting, and how much of it is verifying? So
Yeah.
when that research goes into that, and you become aware of what through that, whether it's conspiracy videos or whether it's looking at numbers, people have started naturally asking questions and doing a lot of research for themselves. So I
Yeah.
think that's a big part of awareness. And number two, there's a lot of people seeking advice, a lot of people giving advice. We suddenly see an influx of personal coaches, transformational coaches, or maybe
Yeah.
people were there, but people have become a lot more aware of people who are able to help each other and the society as well. But we also have to be a little bit conscious about something: helping someone and loving someone and letting it go. And I would say that you want to pass advice, you want to pass great apps, you want to share information about what you have watched and what you have read, but you have also to understand that the other person is walking his or her own path, so they don't necessarily have to follow your advice. And then people get frustrated about this entire thing. I know what, I sent him this video. I wanted him to talk about, he wanted some help, and I helped him, and he's not following my advice. You just got to pass the information, and then you got to let it go. I think letting go is a big part about spirituality. Again, it's like unconditional love, unconditional sharing of information. So it's not force feeding. It's not saying I'm baking banana bread, you got to bake it as well, you know. Being kind to each other, being compassionate, looking internally, accepting that, you know, everybody has, again, leading their own paths, and everybody has got their internal turmoil, and people are taking things differently at their own pace, and being understanding about it, being compassionate about it. And
I think sorry to jump in on that, but I think sitting above that is this empathy. I think has been a huge. It's crazy to say that empathy should win in anything. Empathy should be default, but empathy's been a big winner in this whole thing, because I think we've been both hugely empathetic towards ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves, but also to other people. And that's one thing, particularly within in the workplace. And I hope that now becomes central to how a lot of companies begin to realign how they work. You know, because one of the areas, I think that's really important. So one of the areas, I think, when this going back to the new normal thing, I don't think when it comes to the actual businesses and companies and agencies, when they go back to not a lot will change other than the changes they've been forced to do. I don't think there'll be a massive shift. I mean, there are outline examples, like Spotify now has gone completely virtual, so they will never have a physical headquarters again. All their staff will virtually, which is setting an amazing precedent.
I think Twitter as well. I had Twitter as well. The same thing. Yeah.
I learned the other day that J&J, for example, have made the decision to have homework up until the end of 2020. So some really huge organizations making some big decisions about that. But I think in terms of, what people are going to start to realize again is that, again, it sounds really bizarre that we even have to say this, is the number one priority will be their human capital, will be their talent, will be their people. And they're going to have to build their organization and the systems and the way they do things around those people. Because ultimately that's what's kept these organizations afloat. People adjusting to having to work from home, sometimes under appalling conditions with, young children and, whatever is out without the kind of, the facilities and resources they have in an office. So, sorry, I jumped in on that one. You were just finishing off your spirituality.
No, but basically, I think like this is what spirituality is. Being aware, being kind, a lot of empathy, and being able to perform better for yourself first, and then the rest of the world. So
that you can reconnect with the world. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the essence of spirituality. So spirituality isn't meditation all the time. Spirituality isn't yoga. Spirituality isn't something that's out of the world. In fact, spirituality is the most real thing. And I think, maybe it's just the terminology that we're using over here, but empathy is a big player in whatever the new normal has brought about, is what I can say. Yeah. What do you think? You're a transformational coach, and for yourself and for your clients, how has this shift been? What is the major takeaway from all of this, from your point of view?
So the people that I typically work for, and I've been guilty of not being too articulate around my niche, but the people I attract and the people I work for are typically people like myself who have got a burning ambition to build a purpose-driven business,
Yeah.
but are trapped behind limiting beliefs, subconscious programming that usually fall under the self-esteem category. And I did a video about this a couple of days ago, talking about the self-esteem beliefs and our shielding strategies. For me, it's been, I have my methodology is CALM, which is an acronym for clarity, alignment, leadership, and momentum. And sometimes that's a tangible program that we go through sequentially. Sometimes it sits in the background if I just feel that the client just needs to be taken on a more visceral journey with me. But for me, I found that most people just they realize there is an opportunity coming where there has been an agitation on the way things are done. They realize there's a bigger opportunity than there is limitations coming out of this, and they want to be ready for that.
Yeah.
And they don't want to have to rely on external circumstances and systems and structures to be successful. They want to rely on themselves, and to be able to do that, it comes back to that thing I was talking about proactive resilience. They needed to understand, how do I get so passionately committed to this that I am unshakable, and things like procrastination and self-sabotage and all those different things start to show up. So I kind of work across that whole system, and doing traditional transformation coaching, but also doing spiritual work as well, and doing therapy work through the RTT, which we discussed on your podcast back in March.
Conscious podcast. And one of the things that really, really resonated with me, and I think you did a nice short little clip to reinstate that as well, which is really about your intention, that once you have the right intention when it comes to the transformation process, so there's already the change that is happening. And now maybe I think the second phase of this change is, of course, going back to work. And when the lockdown rules are being eased, at least here in the UAE, and people are starting to go back to the office. But at the end of the day, it's about your intention. What is your intention? What is it? Is it about financial freedom? Is it about building something for the community? Is it about creating a better future for your children? I mean, why are you working? Why are we working? What do we need the money for? So once you have the intention right, as you said, 50% of the work is done, but this intention has to be something that you do for yourself and not for the society. So something that we have been bogged down for hundreds of years, because of the post-World Wars, or whether it was the Industrial Revolution, it's about 9-hour working, or is it 10-hour working? Why do we have to do it? Why do all industries or people working in these industries have to work 8 hours a day? Why does everybody need to have a 5-day work week? I mean, people have started asking these questions, So we're just bringing a lot of awareness. So once we have the intention right, I think that is one true thing that people have to think about when they start going back to work now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that, again, goes back to the personal sovereignty, isn't it? It's like the old model of, you work for us, you work 8 hours a day from this time to this time, here are your duties and your goals, versus we're hiring you as an individual that we know has innate talents and gifts and abilities that can drive our business forward. How would you like to work that pulls out the best from you? Yeah. And that's the difference. Now, the point being is, don't wait around for your company, your organization, your boss to give you the space to define that. Stand up, believe in what you can do, believe in it, and actually don't take it as a fight, but take that suggestion to the organization. I think that's how a lot of it's going to change. I think people have realized, I was chatting to somebody the other day, yesterday actually, a friend of mine who's got his own, I guess you'd call it sort of a private detective business, and he's been obviously homework, and I've said to him, has this whole last sort of 8 weeks redefined and agitated what you thought and how you had to run your business? He goes, completely. I would be traveling 3 weeks out of every month, going to London every single day, and like, that business is doing better than ever, and I've barely left my house. So it's little things like that. And he goes, and as a result, he's had more time to spend with his family, and all the things that go with it. So it's and that's that's not an unusual example. I think a lot of people have felt that as well. Now, of course, at the end of the day, there are, I miss going to London every now and then. I miss having the freedom to go to London, but I like going there on my terms rather than having to feel obliged that I have to go there, particularly the commute. I mean, when I first got back to London from Dubai, in Dubai, I could walk to work. I mean, it just so happened that where I was working, I could walk to work or get the metro. It was easy, right? London has suddenly come back. I was commuting 4 hours every single day, and these god awful packaging. It was absolutely horrific. And I only lasted a year and just went, I can't do this. It was so far away from what I valued as a person and what I wanted. So, but I guess through various experiences that I've had in the past, I've built up that proactive resilience to stand up for myself and make that decision, knowing that I could back it up with what I needed to do to be successful without that structure. And I guess that's a lot of what the knowledge and experience that I'm trying to impart on clients now and get them to sort of reframe their thinking. But it comes back to your point about intention. You're right. I mean, that's a key part of the clarity. I mean, being absolutely clear on not who you are. We don't want to get sort of too meta about this, but being absolutely clear on why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I think troubled times always, I'm sorry, but troubled times always helps us crystallize things, doesn't it? It makes things really, really clear for us. I think some of the most memorable times in our lives, even if you think today, like what are the strongest memories that we have, actually come from challenging times that require attention. Where we have our most focus, it's usually the challenging times. And and then it kind of like it turns us into stuff that we really, really care about the most, and the ability to hone in on what's really important. Once we remember that, then I think it would be very easy to have, or at least it'll be a good starting point to talk about this mind shift that they're talking to your clients about. It's difficult, but a step-by-step approach is always a great starting point.
Yeah, it is. I mean, ultimately, you work backwards from ultimately what do you want? What do you want your year, your month, your week, your day to look like? And how far are you away from that right now? And what's in the way from you getting there? And usually it typically always comes down to one of those four things that sit under self-esteem issues, and then the shielding strategy. So those are, just for the sake of conversation, those self-esteem, we were talking about limiting beliefs before we came on. The self-esteem beliefs are, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, mistakes and failures are bad, and if I make a mistake, I'll get rejected. All of us have, to a greater or lesser degree, issues around those four areas that we learned as children. Okay, that's fine. Depending on how deep that wound is, we then shield, and we shield in 5 ways: through money and prestige, which is workaholism. If I'm succeeding, I'm successful, then I can't be wounded and broken, and no one can say I'm not perfect. The other one is perfectionism, anger, and the last two are invisibility. And my one, which is people pleasing. So the introspection I've done is I have people pleased my entire life. Now, I don't mean that as the literal sense in running around trying to help everyone, but making sure that I was quite sort of vanilla. Like I never really wanted, I could sort of get on with every group of people, never really had one best mate, sort of friend with lots of people, jack of all trades, master of none, sort of spread myself thinly because I didn't want to divide the room. Because when you stand for something and you go all in on something you believe in, which is what I'm doing right now, and I think a lot of people doing right now, you're going to inevitably divide the room. You're going to have to fight for that belief. And it was only until the last couple of years that I've been able to do that, because I've done the work to push past those self-esteem things. So I think that's a big part of the work, because if you can free people from that kind of redundant self-preservation, because it's necessary as your child, and I'm not trying to take, you don't want to take the shield away. We don't want to do that, but if you've got a shield up, let's make sure you're getting the best possible value from that shield and it's working for you, rather than to be holding you back or limiting you from what you want to be doing.
So we're talking about like limiting beliefs or self-sabotaging beliefs. The thing is, it's touched about some of the most common ones, and I'd like to just add one more to that list, because I think that's a huge, huge thing. It's actually the refusal of recovery. That I also think is a limiting belief. People do not want to rest, or they are too hard on themselves. But I tell you what, recovery takes a lot of courage. Recovery is so important, and it's you got to be proactive and intentional about getting the recovery time, whether it's about exercising, working out, or it's about hard days at work. It's okay to just rest and recuperate and think about what's going on in your life. I come from a family, or I think in a Southeast Asian society, it's frowned upon. Recovery is very frowned upon and instilled in us as a limiting belief. My parents would look at me in a weird way if I do not go to work, if I do not go to school for like 3 days straight, or if I don't do a homework for one
So
evening. And it would be like,
when you say recovery, you mean self-care and your
it's
own
about
personal
self-care.
work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
about self-development, it's about self-care, but it's also about resting. It's okay to sleep well.
Yeah.
It's okay to eat well. It's okay to not work out one day. It's okay not to do homework one day.
Yeah.
It's really, really okay to not meditate one day if you don't feel like it. You have to really listen to your own feelings and just recover. Let your body recover and kind of like realign everything. But the fact that a lot of people think that recovery is weakness, I think it's a limiting belief. That I come from a society like that, and I think that's bad. It took me years and years to get out of that, to know that rest time is okay.
So is that a cultural thing? Like, or is it just,
yeah.
Okay.
It's a very cultural thing. Yeah, it is. So,
having spent time in Dubai for 12 years, I do know that, Southeast Asians and generally people from that part of the world have an incredibly strong work ethic. But I didn't realize that was at a cost of a cultural resistance to self-care and self-compassion. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Amazing.
It was something frowned upon. It was something like, are you just sitting there and painting your nails? Are you just sitting there and looking at the trees? I mean, don't you have work to do? These were the comments that I used to hear when I was a kid, So it's like, what's wrong in sitting there and looking at the sky and daydreaming? Oh, it's very wrong. I mean, you should be doing some work. Go to the kitchen and help your mom cook, or go to your room and do some homework, but do not sit there and look at the birds. Yeah, that's really bad. So, yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Coming from a part of the world which pretty much defines most of mystical spirituality and meditation, and that cultural thing has come from there.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have expected that.
No, but the place that I grew up in, Singapore, we kind of like, we're big on human resources. We do not have natural resources. So we kind of like, again, it's just being trained to keep working and to be part of this industrial age, to bring the city up or bring the country up. So you have to stick and abide by a certain culture. Okay. So that slowly starts. Yeah.
So just finally then, as we look to wrap up, I mean, would you have any kind of advice for people now as people start to survey post-pandemic life as we get back to normal? What would be some of the main bits of advice you might offer to people so far as how they can, like we're talking about personal sovereignty, how they can, give themselves the best chance of raising their game, raising their thinking, raising, the aspects of their life slightly?
I think we have to just remember that growth is not linear. And don't be too hard on yourselves. I want to look back at one of the quotes from Michael Gervais. He's a clinical psychologist and high performance coach. And one of the things that he says that's really resonates with me is you can't go from self-critical doubt. I'm paraphrasing over here. We can't go from self-critical doubt to automatically to positive thinking in a snap. You can't do that. But what you can do is just being aware of your thoughts and just hang out in a positive mindset long enough that it becomes a natural place for you to be in. So when you do that, then ideally you can reach that optimal state that you want to be as a human being. And also, it's also important to understand that you don't have to always start your day on a high note. There are ups and downs. But if out of 10 days, 6 of them are good ones, then you're already, you're kind of like 51% there, 60% there towards growth. And
Yeah.
exponentially, that would make a difference when it all
Yeah.
adds up. So it's not about, damn it, I did it yesterday, I didn't do it today, I mean, that's all, it's done and it's gone. No, it's not something like that. You got to be easy on yourself, and self-care is very important, and being mindful is more important. Mindfulness is not really about meditation all the time, but anything
No.
that's driving your attention to what's present. So whatever takes you to a flow state, which is, what is it that you really love doing, and what is it that when you do, you feel like time flies by, then do that thing. And then that
Yeah.
would automatically bring you to a kind of like a high vibration state. That's what's important.
Yeah, I love you. I know. I'm glad you said that. Just quickly, I had something last week, and I haven't shared it yet, and I will be doing an episode on this because I think it would be really useful for people. About a week ago, I found myself waking up every morning in a real funk. It came from absolutely nowhere. I just wasn't getting myself moving. I remember I said to myself, and I think a lot of it was this anxiety that. Self-imposed anxiety that, look, we're coming out of this pandemic, like, what have I done? How have I used this last 8 weeks? And I kind of felt, well, am I putting too much pressure on myself? And maybe I should just go easy on myself. And is it good enough? Not that I've actually got through it, but either way, that tension, I wasn't calm. And obviously calm is my thing. I wasn't calm by definition. So I kind of figured out that, there's two things we do every day. We clean our teeth twice a day, right? And both those times we're looking in the mirror. And I said to myself, in the evening, in the morning, when you're looking at the mirror, how do you want to feel? How do you really want to feel? What emotions do you want your day to be top and, bookended and started with? And I didn't know. And I didn't have that kind of self-awareness. So I just decided I did some work, and I think it was content, excited. And there was 3 others. And then I did a little exercise to say, well, what 5 things can I do in my personal life that create those emotions? And what 5 things can I do in my business that I know will always trigger contentment, excitement? And I forget what the other 2 are now. And I just wrote those things down, and I called it the Calm Legacy. I don't know why. I think I've been watching the Bourne films, but I called it the Calm Legacy, and I printed it out. And it's proved phenomenally useful, because if ever I feel myself kind of, like you just said, slipping into a little bit of sort of lower energies, I just look at that and go, do you know what? I need to lift my spirit a little bit. I can't go from frustrated to bliss and joy. But what I can do is I can get up to a couple of rungs up the ladder. So I'll go and mess around with the dog, or I'll do some writing, or I'll go and play FIFA, or I'll go and play with some music. And I know that sounds really simple, but if you go through the thought process, it's very self-affirming to yourself. And then to have that, as a list to go, right, okay, I need to jump in here and do a little bit of do a bit of self-care, then it's to hand. So yeah, it's a good point. I think we do need to ease up on ourselves a little bit, but more importantly, spend a bit more time getting consciously engaged with what works for us as individuals, right? No matter what that thing is, it doesn't care. It's not about having the peanut gallery agree with you. We didn't come here for everyone to agree with us. No. We came here to agree with ourselves, what's going on in here. And if we can get aligned with that, everything falls into place.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So how can people get in touch with you for Unconscious? Is there any how would people want to engage with what you're doing?
Yeah, Get Unconscious. That's our handle across all social media. So we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the regular social media sites, on YouTube. So Get Unconscious, or www.unconsciouspodcast.com. We're there on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just got to look up for Unconscious Podcast, and we're there.
Brilliant. Well, Reva, thank you so much for your time this evening. I know it's getting late over there, so I'll let you go. Have a lovely evening, and I'm sure we will be talking again very soon.
I really enjoyed my time. Thank you for having me on the show, CB. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye now. Bye.
Bye.
That's it. Thank you very much for joining. If you've been watching this live, I really appreciate you swinging by. If you've got any questions for me or Reva, by all means, drop them down in the comments, or you can send me a message on Messenger. I'll be back next week with episode 4. Until then, wishing everybody all the calm. And if you want to talk to me about my coaching or my RTT work, once again, please just feel free to reach out either on Messenger or drop me a comment in here. All the very best, and I'll see you soon. Bye.